following broadcast is a work of pure fiction. Listener discretion is advised. If you enjoy this chilling and spine-tingling narration, please show your support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Good evening, listeners. If you're out there tuning in, wherever you are, I need you to pay close attention. What I'm about to tell you may sound like science fiction, but I promise you it's not. It all started weeks ago, but none of us realized it then. Maybe we didn't want to believe it. Maybe we just weren't ready. But now, there's no denying what's happening around us. Let me take you back to the beginning. It was a quiet Tuesday night when the first signals came through. The kind of night where the hum of the city dies down and the airwaves grow still. That's when the observatories began picking up something strange. Not the usual cosmic static, no, a pattern. Rhythmic bursts of radio waves at precisely timed intervals. At first, the experts thought it was a pulsar or some other celestial phenomenon, but the sequence was too intentional, too precise. I remember the first time I heard it. A colleague sent me a recording, a low, oscillating hum punctuated by bursts of static. It sounded like something alive, almost breathing. For days, the scientific community was in a frenzy. Astronomers, physicists, and cryptographers were all trying to decode the message. They said it was coming from deep space, somewhere just beyond the Oort cloud. That's far, almost unfathomably far. And yet, the signal was strong, like it was aimed directly at us. There was speculation, wild theories that it was the remnants of some ancient civilization or a natural phenomenon we just didn't understand yet. But there were whispers too, whispers that it was something more. Then came the sightings. People across the globe started reporting strange objects in the sky. At first, it was dismissed as weather balloons or drones, but the footage told a different story. Spheres of light moving with impossible speed, changing direction as if they were defying the laws of physics. The skeptics said it was a hoax, videos doctored by thrill seekers. But the sightings kept coming, and they weren't just isolated anymore. These objects were appearing over major cities, Los Angeles, London, Beijing, and right here in the Midwest. I still remember the night I saw one for myself. I had stepped outside the station to grab a breath of fresh air. The sky was clear, the stars shining bright, and then there it was, a glowing orb hovering silently above the treetops. It didn't make a sound, not even a whisper, just hung there like it was watching, and then in an instant, it shot upward and disappeared into the void. Governments around the world scrambled to respond. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, and vague reassurances were broadcasted to the public. It's nothing to worry about, they said, just an atmospheric anomaly. But we all knew better. The internet was flooded with videos, photos, and frantic posts. People were scared. And then, something else happened, something that still chills me to my core. The animals knew. Dogs, cats, birds, they all started acting strange. Dogs barked endlessly, their howls echoing through empty streets. Birds abandoned their usual migration patterns, swarming in chaotic flocks. Even the insects seemed to vanish overnight. It was like the natural world could sense something we couldn't. Then, last night, the power flickered, across the entire city, not just here, but everywhere. One moment the lights were on, the next, we were plunged into darkness. Satellites were disrupted, communications jammed. It was as if the world had taken a collective breath and stopped. And that's when the first real contact happened. NASA had been tracking an object approaching Earth, a massive structure unlike anything we'd ever seen. They called it an anomaly, but let's call it what it really is, a ship. A ship the size of a small city, moving silently through the void. It didn't burn up as it entered our atmosphere. No sonic booms, no explosions. It simply descended slowly until it was visible to the naked eye. And there it hangs now, motionless, a black silhouette against the stars. I don't know what they want. I don't know if they're friend or foe. But I can tell you this, we're not alone. Not anymore. if you're listening to me right now, wherever you are, stay safe, stay hidden, because this is just the beginning. Good evening again, listeners. If you're still out there, if you're still listening, I need you to stay with me. I know it's hard to wrap your head around what's happening, but I'm here to tell you the truth. The truth about what we've seen and what's coming. I don't know if you're hiding in your basements, sitting in a candlelit room with your family, or driving aimlessly down darkened roads, but wherever you are, you deserve to know what's really happening out there. Because tonight, the world changed forever. It started at dawn, just as the first rays of light broke across the horizon. The ship, the one we've been watching for days, moved. It was subtle at first, a slight shift, almost imperceptible. But then, with a sound like the hum of a distant tuning fork, it began descending. Slowly, deliberately, it came down, hovering just above the skyline of New York City. The news channels caught it live, cameras zooming in on its impossible surface. It wasn't metal, not in any way we'd recognize. It looked organic, like a living organism, with a texture that shifted and rippled as if it were breathing. People poured into the streets despite the warnings. Crowds gathered below, staring up in a mixture of awe and terror. I could hear it through the broadcast feeds, the murmur of thousands of voices, the occasional sob, the sharp cries of children clinging to their parents. Everyone wanted answers, and no one had them. The government was silent. The military stood in formation on the streets below, tanks and armed soldiers surrounding the area, but even they looked small and powerless beneath that massive, ominous shape. Then it happened, the first contact. A section of the ship seemed to open, not like a door or a hatch, but more like a wound splitting apart. A light spilled out, blinding and pure, and with it came the sound. Not a voice, not words, but a deep, resonating vibration that seemed to echo inside your very bones. People in the crowd screamed, clutching their ears, falling to their knees. The broadcasters who were live on the scene were cut off mid-sentence, their cameras falling to the ground, showing only trembling images of the chaos. And then they emerged. The first figure stepped out of the light, and for a moment, no one could breathe. They weren't like us. Not in any way. Their bodies were tall and elongated, at least twice the height of a human. Their skin, or whatever it was translucent, glowing faintly with a network of pulsing veins beneath the surface. They didn't have faces, not as we define them, just smooth, featureless ovals where their heads should be. But the most unsettling thing was how they moved. It wasn't walking, it was gliding, as if gravity didn't quite apply to them the same way. The crowd froze. For a brief, agonizing moment, there was silence, and then someone screamed, a high-pitched, terrified wail that shattered the stillness. That was all it took. Panic erupted. People pushed and shoved, trying to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The streets were packed, and the military lines were impenetrable. Soldiers shouted orders, trying to control the chaos, but it was no use. And the aliens, they just stood there, watching. Then came the pulse. Without warning, a wave of energy radiated out from the ship, like a ripple in a still pond. It wasn't visible, but you could feel it, a deep bone-rattling vibration that passed through everything. Buildings trembled, car alarms blared, and every piece of technology in its path went dark. Phones, cameras, radios, all of it dead in an instant. I barely had time to grab my backup generator before the studio went dark. Even now, I can hear the faint hum of it behind me, the only thing keeping this broadcast alive. The pulse didn't just knock out power. People in the crowd fell where they stood, clutching their chests, their bodies convulsing. Later reports would call it a neurological disruption field, a kind of energy that interferes with the human nervous system. Those closest to the ship didn't survive. The rest, well, they're not the same anymore. Reports are coming in of people wandering aimlessly, their eyes blank, their minds seemingly erased. The military
military tried to respond. They fired warning shots, then heavier artillery, but it was useless. The aliens didn't flinch. Bullets disintegrated before they even reached their targets, caught in some kind of invisible field. A missile was launched, its trail of smoke cutting across the sky, but it detonated harmlessly, miles from the ship. It was like watching ants try to stop a tidal wave.
As the day went on, more ships appeared. They descended over major cities: London, Tokyo, Moscow, Sydney. Each time, the same sequence. The ship arrives, the light opens, the figures emerge, and the pulse spreads. Chaos follows. The skies are filled with smoke now, the streets choked with abandoned cars and desperate people searching for answers, for safety. And yet, through all of this, the aliens have made no effort to communicate. No words, no gestures, no demands, just their presence, their silence, and that overwhelming feeling that they're watching us, studying us. I've received reports from other broadcasters, those few who still have power. One described a town in Nevada where the entire population vanished overnight. Another spoke of strange organic machines, spidery, insect-like constructs that scuttle through the streets, scanning everything they encounter. What are they looking for? Why are they here? No one knows. But the scariest part, listeners, is the realization that we're powerless. Our weapons, our technology, our governments, none of it matters. We've always believed we were at the top of the food chain, the masters of our world. But now, staring up at those silent, glowing figures, it's clear how small we really are. If you're out there, if you can hear me, stay safe, stay hidden, avoid the cities. Whatever these beings are, they're not here for peace. And this is only the beginning. Good evening, listeners. If you're still out there, still clinging to some shred of normalcy, I need you to hear me out. Things have escalated. No, that's not the right word. They've descended into something I can barely put into words. Everything we feared, everything we hoped wouldn't happen has begun. This is not a waiting game anymore. This is survival. The invasion has started. It began in the early hours, just before dawn. The ships that had been hovering silently over our cities for days finally made their move. They descended lower, close enough that you could see their immense size blotting out the sky. Their dark, rippling surfaces reflecting the fires and chaos below. The air grew heavier, almost electric, like the world itself was holding its breath. And then, without warning, the ships opened their gates. If you've been listening to me, you know I've described those openings before. The wounds in their hulls that spill out blinding light. But this time it wasn't just light. This time, something emerged. At first, it was a sound, a low, guttural hum that resonated deep in your chest, making the hairs on your neck stand on end. Then came the creatures. They poured out of the ships in a steady, unrelenting wave, not gliding like the tall, translucent figures we'd seen before, but moving with a terrible, insect-like efficiency. Their bodies were armored, segmented, with limbs that bent in ways that seemed wrong, unnatural. Their skin, if you could call it that, was a slick, dark material that seemed to absorb the light around them. And their eyes, those glowing, multifaceted eyes, seemed to see everything. The first wave of these creatures swarmed the streets, moving with terrifying speed. They didn't attack right away. Instead, they spread out, scanning everything: people, buildings, vehicles. They emitted a strange clicking sound, like a swarm of giant insects communicating with each other. And then, as if on some silent command, they turned their attention to us. I've seen horrors today, listeners. Things I will never be able to forget. These creatures are not just soldiers, they're hunters. They don't just kill, they capture. I've seen them snatch people off the streets, their spindly limbs wrapping around their victims like a grotesque embrace. They don't make a sound as they take them, and the people, they don't scream for long. The moment those things touch you, something happens. It's like they paralyze you, leaving you helpless, as they drag you back toward the ships. And it's not just people they're after. These creatures seem to be dismantling our world piece by piece. I watched as one of them approached a parked car. It placed one of its many limbs on the hood, and within seconds the metal began to dissolve, breaking down into some kind of dark, viscous liquid. They're harvesting, listeners. Harvesting everything. Metal, concrete, even living matter. I don't know what they're doing with it, but I have a sickening feeling it's not for our benefit. The military tried to fight back. I heard the gunfire echoing through the streets, saw the tanks rolling down Main Street. For a moment, it felt like we might stand a chance. But then I saw what these creatures were capable of. Bullets didn't pierce their armor. Explosions barely slowed them down. And when the soldiers got too close, well, let's just say it wasn't a fair fight. I saw one of these things take down an entire squad single-handedly. It moved so fast it was a blur, its limbs slicing through metal and flesh with horrifying ease. The soldiers didn't stand a chance, and when it was done, it didn't even pause. It just moved on to the next target, as if it were programmed to destroy. I've heard reports from other cities. Chicago is in flames, Los Angeles is a war zone, London, Tokyo, Sydney, it's the same story everywhere. The ships descend, the creatures emerge, and humanity is left to scramble for survival. Some are calling it an extermination, others a harvest. All I know is that we're losing. But it's not just the physical destruction that's terrifying. It's the psychological toll. These creatures have a way of getting into your head. People are reporting strange dreams, visions of their loved ones calling to them, begging them to come closer to the ships. I've seen it myself, neighbors who were perfectly sane one moment, suddenly walking toward the light, their faces blank, their eyes glazed over, and once they're inside, they don't come back. The scientists who are still alive have theories. They think the ships are emitting some kind of low-frequency signal, a form of mind control that overrides our instincts. It's why animals are fleeing, why some people are collapsing into fits of hysteria. It's like these invaders are rewriting the rules of our biology, bending us to their will. As for me, I've barricaded myself in the station. The doors are locked, the windows boarded up. I've got enough supplies to last a few days, but after that, I don't know. I've been watching the streets from a small crack in the boards, and it's like something out of a nightmare. The city is unrecognizable, cars abandoned, buildings crumbling, and those creatures crawling over everything like a plague. And yet I keep broadcasting. Why? Because someone has to. Because if you're out there, if you're listening, you need to know you're not alone. You need to know that there's still someone out here fighting to hold on to what's left of our humanity. I don't know how this ends, listeners. I don't know if it does, but I do know this. We can't give up. Not yet. Stay hidden. Stay quiet. And for God's sake, don't go near the light. This invasion is just beginning, and if we're going to survive it, we need to be smart. We need to be strong. If you're out there, keep listening. I'll keep talking as long as I can. Together, we might just make it through this. Listeners, if you can still hear me, if there's still a spark of hope left in your heart, then this part is for you. For days we've been hunted, terrorized, and brought to the brink of extinction. Our cities have fallen, our people scattered, and the invaders seem unstoppable. But tonight, for the first time since this nightmare began, I have something different to report. Tonight, humanity fought back. And while it wasn't perfect, it was something. Our first real attempt at standing against this overwhelming force. Let me tell you what happened. The counterattack began in the most unexpected place, Chicago, or what's left of it. The city has been a war zone since the first ships descended, its skyline choked with smoke, its streets littered with debris and shattered lives. But somewhere in that chaos, a group of survivors managed to do the unthinkable. They found a way to fight back. I didn't believe it when the reports first came through. How could I? For days, we've watched every attempt at resistance fail miserably. Tanks destroyed, planes shot down, soldiers wiped out in seconds. The aliens seemed invincible, their technology so far beyond ours that even trying to oppose them felt like an act of futility. But then came the message. A faint, crackling transmission picked up by one of my colleagues, still broadcasting from a hidden bunker near the Great Lakes. "We found a weakness," the voice had said. A woman's voice, steady despite the fear I could hear lurking beneath it. "They're not invincible. We can hurt them. We can kill them." The message spread like wildfire, relayed from one surviving broadcaster to the next, until it reached every corner of the shattered country. At first, people didn't believe it. How could they? But then the details started coming in. Grainy video footage, eyewitness accounts, fragments of information that began to form a clearer picture. The weakness wasn't in the creatures themselves, but in their technology. The same fields that made them impervious to bullets and missiles could be disrupted under the right conditions. Someone, a group of rogue engineers, scavengers, and former military personnel, had managed to build a crude electromagnetic pulse device using salvaged parts from a power station. They'd tested it on one of the smaller alien drones, the spidery machines that had been scuttling through the streets, and it worked. The drone collapsed in on itself, its limbs twitching like a dying insect before going still. The plan was simple in concept, but incredibly risky in execution. They needed to deliver the EMP device directly to one of the alien motherships, the massive vessels hovering over the cities. It was a suicide mission, no doubt about it. The device was too large to transport by air, and the roads were swarming with alien forces. But the team was determined. They knew the risks, and they knew what was at stake. The convoy set out at dawn, a motley collection of vehicles armored with scrap metal and bristling with makeshift weapons. Trucks, jeeps, even an old-school bus painted black and reinforced with steel plates. They moved through the ruins of the city, sticking to the shadows, avoiding the main roads where the alien patrols were thickest. Along the way, they were joined by others, survivors who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by fighting back. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, their numbers had grown into a small army. The final approach to the mothership was a nightmare. The aliens must have sensed the threat because they swarmed the convoy with everything they had. The battle that followed was unlike anything I've ever heard described. Gunfire echoed through the streets, mixed with the high-pitched screeches of the alien drones and the deep, guttural roars of the larger creatures. The makeshift army fought with everything they had: guns, explosives, even hand-to-hand combat when it came down to it. I've heard stories of incredible bravery from that battle. A man who climbed onto one of the alien drones and jammed a grenade into its core, sacrificing himself to take it down. A group of women who formed a barricade with their bodies, holding off the creatures long enough for the convoy to pass. These weren't soldiers, listeners. They were ordinary people. Teachers, mechanics, parents. And yet, they fought like demons. When the convoy finally reached the mothership, they had only minutes to act. The EMP device was set on a timer, and the team had to get it as close to the ship as possible before it detonated. The mothership, sensing the threat, began to react. A beam of light shot down from its hull, vaporizing everything in its path. But the survivors didn't falter. They drove straight into the heart of the danger, their vehicles exploding around them as the beam tore through their ranks. In the end, only one truck made it through. The driver, a young man whose name I don't even know, plunged straight into the light, his vehicle engulfed in flames. But he made it. The EMP device detonated just as the mothership began to pull him inside. The explosion was unlike anything I've ever seen or heard. A ripple of energy spread out from the device, passing through the mothership like a shockwave. The ship's surface rippled and cracked, its lights flickering and dying. For a moment, it seemed to hang in the air, almost hesitant, and then it began to fall. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, until it crashed into the ground with a deafening roar. The creatures, those terrifying, unstoppable creatures, collapsed where they stood. Their bodies twitched and spasmed before going still, as if their lifeline had been severed. The survivors cheered, their voices rising above the destruction. For the first time in days, there was hope. But the victory was short-lived. As the dust settled, the remaining ships began to react. They shifted in the sky, their lights growing brighter, their hums deeper. It was as if they were angry, as if they were adapting, and then they retaliated. I don't have all the details yet, but the retaliation was swift and devastating. Entire sections of Chicago were leveled in minutes. The survivors were forced to flee, scattering into the countryside, their victory a bittersweet memory. Still, the message is clear. We can fight back. The aliens are not invincible. They can be hurt. They can be killed. But the cost is high, and the danger is greater than ever. So here we are, listeners, standing on the edge of the abyss. The counterattack has begun, but the war is far from over. Stay safe, stay strong, and remember, as long as there's someone left to fight, humanity is not done yet. Listeners, as I sit here in the flickering light of this station, surrounded by the faint hum of the emergency generator and the crackle of static in the air, I can't help but wonder about the minds behind this invasion. These creatures, these intruders from a place we can barely fathom, have turned our world upside down. But what drives them? What do they want? Tonight I'll take you deeper into the heart of the unknown, into the minds of the invaders. Or at least, as close to their minds as we can get. Because if we don't understand them, how can we ever hope to fight them? For weeks, we've been reacting, running, hiding, fighting back when we can. But as the dust settles, as survivors gather and fragments of information come to light, one thing is becoming painfully clear. This invasion isn't random. It's not chaotic. It's methodical, deliberate, and terrifyingly calculated. These beings didn't stumble upon Earth by accident. They came here with a purpose, a goal, and that purpose is unraveling before our eyes. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the first reports of their arrival. Remember the way their ships hovered silently, observing us? Remember the way their initial actions seemed almost passive? They didn't attack right away. They didn't destroy for the sake of destruction. Instead, they scanned. They analyzed. They studied us. At the time, it felt like an ominous waiting game, but now, looking back, I realize it was something much worse. It was reconnaissance. These beings weren't just watching us, they were dissecting us in the most chilling, clinical way imaginable. Every move we made, every attempt at resistance was cataloged and analyzed. They were learning about us, not just as individuals, but as a species. And then there's the way they target us. Have you noticed it, listeners? The way their technology and tactics seem almost personal? I've heard countless stories from survivors, stories of people who felt as though they were being singled out, hunted by the aliens. A man in Denver who swears one of the creatures followed him for miles, ignoring everyone else. A family in Seattle whose home was torn apart while the neighbors' houses were left untouched. These aren't coincidences, these are patterns. The scientists who are still alive and working, God bless them, have started piecing together a theory. It's not perfect, but it's the best we have. They believe these beings operate on a level of intelligence that is so far beyond ours, it's almost incomprehensible. Their brains, or whatever equivalent they have, seem to function like hyper-advanced quantum computers, capable of processing information at speeds we can't even begin to fathom. But what's truly terrifying is the way they seem to connect. These creatures aren't individuals in the way we think of individuals. They don't act alone. They're part of a collective, a hive mind, where every single entity is linked to a larger consciousness. When one of them learns something, they all learn it. When one of them makes a decision, it's part of a larger unified plan. And that brings us to their intent. What do they want? Why are they here? The answer, I fear, is as complex as it is horrifying. The first theory is the simplest. They're here for resources. It makes sense, doesn't it? A highly advanced species arriving on a resource-rich planet and taking what they need. But if that's true, why target us? Why not simply strip the planet bare and move on? Why go to the trouble of hunting us, capturing us, studying us? That's where the second theory comes in, and it's far more chilling. Some scientists believe these beings see us not as obstacles, but as resources ourselves. Think about it. The way they paralyze their victims, the way they drag them back to their ships. What if we're not just in the way? What if we're the prize? I've heard whispers of experiments, people who managed to escape the alien ships claiming they saw others inside, hooked up to strange machines, their bodies being drained of something. Blood, energy, life force, no one knows for sure. But whatever it is, the aliens seem to need it. And that makes this invasion something far worse than a war. It makes it a harvest. But there's another possibility, one that keeps me awake at night. What if this isn't about resources at all? What if it's about survival? What if these beings are fleeing something even worse than themselves? Something so catastrophic that they were forced to leave their own world and find a new one. If that's true, then this invasion isn't just an attack, it's colonization, and we're the ones being pushed out. Of course, these are just theories. The truth is, we don't know. We can't know. These creatures are so alien, so fundamentally different from us, that trying to understand their motives feels almost impossible. But one thing is certain, they're not here to coexist. They're here to dominate, to take, to claim this planet as their own. And that brings me to the question that haunts me more than any other. Can they feel? Do they understand the pain they're causing? Or is it all just cold, mechanical efficiency? I've watched these creatures in action, seen the way they move, the way they fight, and I can't help but wonder, do they hate us? Do they see us as inferior, as pests to be exterminated? Or are we simply irrelevant? I've also been thinking about their hierarchy, their structure. There must be a chain of command, a leader, something controlling this vast operation. The ships, the creatures, the drones, they're all too coordinated, too precise, for this to be anything but a well-oiled machine. Somewhere out there, maybe even on one of those ships, there's a mind behind it all. A being, or beings, making the decisions, pulling the strings. And that, listeners, is where our hope lies. Because if we can find that leader, if we can disrupt their chain of command, we might stand a chance. It's a slim chance, but it's better than nothing. As I sit here, broadcasting into the void, I can't help but feel the weight of it all. This isn't just a battle for survival. It's a battle for understanding, for hope, for humanity itself. And as long as I have breath in my lungs and a signal to send, I'll keep searching for answers. Because the more we know about them, the better our chances of fighting back. Stay safe, stay strong, and stay human. This is far from over. Listeners, tonight, my words may feel heavier than usual because what I'm about to share is not just the continuation of a story. It's the Chronicle of Loss. Tonight, I'll recount the fall of our great cities, monuments of human ingenuity and resilience reduced to graveyards of steel and ash. And I'll tell you this, there's a distinct horror in watching the heartbeats of civilization stilled one by one. Each fall leaves a deeper scar, not just on the land, but on the soul of humanity. As I speak, I want you to imagine the world as it was, bright, bustling, alive, and then see it through my eyes as it crumbles into darkness. When the invasion began in earnest, cities became the first and most obvious targets, not because of their strategic value, at least not entirely, but because they represented us. They were the beating hearts of our species, hubs of culture, history, and connection. To bring down a city wasn't just to destroy infrastructure, it was to strike at the very identity of humanity. The first to fall was Tokyo. I remember the reports flooding in, fragments of chaos crackling over failing communication lines. People described the alien ships hovering silently over the skyline, their dark, seamless forms blotting out the sun. For hours, nothing happened. The entire city stood still, breathless, waiting for a sign, a movement, anything. And then it began. The ships unleashed a weapon unlike anything we had ever seen. It wasn't fire or explosives or lasers. It was something far worse. A beam of light, impossibly bright, descended from the largest ship and engulfed entire blocks. At first it seemed harmless, just light. But within seconds, buildings began to disintegrate. Not explode, not collapse, disintegrate. The structures dissolved into fine dust, as if the very bonds holding matter together had been severed. People caught in the beam didn't even have time to scream. They simply vanished. The survivors described it as surreal, almost dreamlike. One moment, they were surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of their city. The next, everything was gone. Streets turned to barren wastelands, skyscrapers reduced to skeletal frames. And then came the drones, sleek, insect-like machines that descended in swarms, hunting down any who had escaped the initial assault. Tokyo was the first, but it wasn't the last. In the days that followed, other cities fell in rapid succession. New York, London, Mumbai, São Paulo, Moscow. Each attack followed the same pattern. A hovering silence, the devastating beam, the swarms of drones. It was systematic, efficient, and utterly ruthless. I remember the fall of New York vividly. Reports came in during one of my broadcasts, and I'll never forget the raw, trembling voice of a fellow broadcaster who was still on the ground there. He described the ships hovering over the city, their presence casting long, unnatural shadows over the streets. The beam began at the financial district, tearing through the skyscrapers like paper. People fled in every direction, but there was nowhere to go. The bridges were destroyed within minutes, trapping millions on the island. One by one, the boroughs were silenced. The Statue of Liberty, that timeless symbol of hope and freedom, was the last to go. The beam engulfed her, and for a brief moment, her silhouette stood defiantly against the light. And then she was gone, leaving nothing but a plume of dust that drifted over the harbor. What struck me most about these attacks wasn't just the scale of destruction, but the precision. The aliens weren't merely destroying, they were erasing. It was as if they wanted to wipe every trace of us from the earth. And yet, in some cities, they left certain areas untouched. Why? No one knows. Perhaps it was part of their study, or perhaps it was a cruel reminder of what once was. Los Angeles held out longer than most, thanks to its sprawling layout and the mountains providing some natural barriers. But in the end, it fell too. Survivors told me of the strange sound that preceded the attack, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. They described the skies turning an unnatural shade of green as the ships descended. When the beam came, it wasn't just buildings that were destroyed, it was the ground itself. Whole neighborhoods sank into the earth, swallowed by massive sinkholes that opened like gaping mouths. Paris, the city of light, became a city of shadows. The Eiffel Tower stood defiant against the alien ships, a symbol of human resilience. But when the attack came, it was swift and merciless. Survivors described seeing the tower collapse, not from the beam, but from something else, something invisible. A force that crushed it from the inside out, as if the air itself had turned against it. And then there was Rio de Janeiro. The Christ the Redeemer statue, standing tall on Corcovado Mountain, seemed to stare directly at the alien ships. The beam came as it always did, but this time it faltered. The statue remained standing, even as the surrounding areas were decimated. For a moment, it seemed like a miracle, but then the drones arrived, and the statue was obliterated, piece by piece, by their relentless weapons. Listeners, as I recount these events, I can feel the weight of every word. These were more than just cities. They were homes. They were lives. They were memories. Each one that fell was a wound, a scar on the face of humanity. And yet, amidst the destruction, there were stories of survival. In Chicago, a group of firefighters managed to save dozens of people trapped in a collapsing building, using old tunnels to lead them to safety. In Berlin, a group of engineers rigged an abandoned subway car to create a makeshift shelter, providing refuge for over 100 people. But survival came at a cost. For every story of hope, there were 100 of despair. Families torn apart, children lost in the chaos, entire communities wiped out. The psychological toll was staggering. People began to lose hope, to give in to despair. And that, I believe, was part of the aliens' plan. Listeners, as I speak these words, I can feel the weight of the cities we've lost. They were more than just places. They were symbols of who we are, of what we've built. And yet, even in the face of such unimaginable loss, I believe we must hold on to the one thing the aliens cannot take from us, our spirit. Because as long as there are survivors, as long as there are voices to tell these stories, humanity is not finished. The cities may have fallen, but the fight is far from over. Stay strong, stay safe, and remember, we are still here. And as long as we're here, there's hope. Listeners, if you are still with me, if you're still hearing my voice, then know that we have survived the fall of cities. We have witnessed the unimaginable destruction, the erasure of our greatest monuments, the stifling silence that followed. But I am here to tell you something that, despite the darkness, still shines through. There is hope, there is resistance, and it is rising. The flame that was almost extinguished in the face of the invasion is now being rekindled, not in grand cities or fortified armies, but in the hearts and minds of ordinary people scattered across the world. People who refuse to surrender, people who are beginning to fight back. When the first waves of alien forces decimated our cities, the world fell into a panic. Governments collapsed, communication lines were severed, and for a time, it seemed that we were at the mercy of beings far beyond our understanding. But as the dust settled and the survivors emerged from the ruins, something unexpected began to take shape. Resistance. It wasn't organized at first. It wasn't some grand military force, nor was it some heroic coalition of world leaders. It was something far more primal, the will to survive, to fight back, to protect what remained of our people. In the early days, it was nothing more than small pockets of survivors, hidden in the shadows of collapsed cities, scavenging for food and resources. But as the days turned to weeks, these groups began to communicate. Radios, broken, static-filled, but functional, became lifelines. It was through these radio waves that the resistance began to organize. Fragmented messages from cities like Paris, Berlin, Johannesburg, and Houston started to find their way to my broadcast station, and what I heard was unlike anything I had ever expected. People were coming together, they were strategizing, they were forming alliances, not just within their own countries, but across borders. The first real signs of organized resistance came from a small group in Australia. They had managed to secure an old military base deep in the outback and began experimenting with salvage technology. They didn't have advanced weapons, nothing even close to the power the aliens wielded, but what they had was ingenuity, the same ingenuity that had built our cities and our systems. The first breakthrough was an electromagnetic pulse device, a crude but effective way of disabling the alien drones for a short time. It didn't last long, but it was enough to buy them time to rescue survivors and establish communication with other pockets of resistance. Word spread fast. Soon, survivors in Canada, the United States, and Europe began replicating the technology, modifying it, improving upon it. It was our first victory, a small one, but a victory nonetheless. We had found a way to hurt them, even if only temporarily. And it was enough to raise the spirits of those who had been hiding in fear, knowing they could now fight back. But the aliens, despite their seemingly unstoppable technology, were not invincible. And it wasn't just our technology that was being refined. Our understanding of their biology, what little we knew, began to grow. As more survivors gathered in the shadows, a few brave souls, some of them scientists, began studying the remnants of alien vessels, their technology, and their behavior. What they found, though, was far more chilling than we had anticipated. The aliens, as it turned out, had a peculiar weakness. It wasn't physical, but biological. Their bodies, though incredibly strong and resilient, were not immune to certain terrestrial pathogens, microbes, bacteria. They had evolved in a sterile, controlled environment with little exposure to the viruses and bacteria that we've adapted to over millennia. One scientist, an expert in virology, discovered that certain strains of bacteria could have a devastating effect on their biology, though it was far from simple. It required precision. It required time. Still, this knowledge was enough to inspire a new strategy, biological warfare. It wasn't ideal, and it came with its own risks, but it became one of the most effective ways to combat the alien forces. As more research was conducted, this led to the development of bioweapons designed to infect the alien troops, to sabotage their defenses. It was a race against time to produce these weapons before the aliens could finish their conquest of Earth. But while the scientists worked tirelessly on this, the heart of the resistance was still growing. Small bands of survivors, armed with makeshift weapons and a fierce will to fight, began launching guerrilla strikes against the alien forces. They didn't have the luxury of heavy artillery, but what they lacked in firepower, they made up for in strategy. They learned to blend in with the environment, using the very cities the aliens had destroyed as cover. They raided alien supply caches, stole what technology they could, and then vanished into the night, leaving behind only confusion and destruction in their wake. And amidst this chaos, there was a new wave of leadership. A few individuals, humble at first, began to rise above the fray, survivors with sharp minds and unwavering determination. They weren't generals, they weren't soldiers. They were doctors, teachers, engineers, people who knew how to solve problems. They understood what was at stake. They became the lifeline of the resistance, uniting people across the world, sharing information, and leading small cells of fighters. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of humanity. I received countless transmissions from these resistance leaders. One in particular stands out, a woman by the name of Sophia, who led a cell of survivors in what was once New York City. She described their underground network, the tunnels and abandoned subways that had become their new home. They had been living in the shadows for weeks, hiding from the drones, while simultaneously launching hit-and-run attacks on alien patrols. They were under constant threat, but their resolve was ironclad. Sophia told me about the first time they managed to capture one of the alien drones. It was an incredible moment, a turning point. They studied it for days, discovering weaknesses in its circuitry and its weaponry. They found a way to disable it, to turn it against the invaders. It wasn't much, but it was something. They were learning. They were adapting. And it wasn't just about the tech. It was about the people, the human spirit, the drive to survive. In a small town in the Midwest, a group of farmers, using only the tools at their disposal, managed to craft homemade explosives, which they used to ambush an alien supply convoy. It was a dangerous mission, but they succeeded. They lost a few good people, but they dealt a heavy blow to the aliens, disrupting their efforts to establish control. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the resistance spread across the globe. Cells of fighters, small and isolated, connected like a web, pulling resources and knowledge from all corners of the earth. People who had never met before, who came from different walks of life, different nations, different cultures, became one. They had no choice. They had to fight for each other. And it worked. Resistance fighters, civilians, scientists, engineers, everyone had a role. The struggle had become our defining purpose, and it was in this struggle that we found our unity. We were no longer divided by borders, by nationalities, by ideologies. We were humanity, standing together against an enemy far more powerful than any we had ever faced. And as I speak to you now, I can hear the stories coming in. The first major victory came not from a battlefield, but from a hidden lab in the Swiss Alps, where a group of scientists developed a virus tailored specifically to the alien biology. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. Humanity was not so easily destroyed. Resistance had risen, and we were beginning to show the invaders that Earth was not theirs to take without a fight. The battle had only just begun, but we had won something crucial: our will to survive, and with it, we were going to take back what was ours. The fight is far from over, listeners, but we are not giving up. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, we will rise, and we will win. This is the voice of humanity, coming to you through the static of a broken world. If you can hear me, you know the battle is no longer just survival. We've come to a point where the invasion, the destruction, the unimaginable horrors, they're all culminating in this, the final stand, our last chance to hold on to everything we are, to stop them. It's now or never. And I'm telling you, we will fight. The aliens have grown bolder, their tactics more refined, their presence more ubiquitous. The cities we once knew as our homes have been reduced to charred skeletons of their former selves. The skies above us have been darkened by their machines, casting a pall over the earth. The air, once crisp and clean, is now thick with the smell of burnt metal and the stench of death. The fight has been long, brutal, and unforgiving, but it has led us to this final hour. The resistance, made up of survivors from every corner of the globe, has grown into an organized force. And now, after months of struggle, we are finally prepared to launch a full-scale counteroffensive. I'm standing in what remains of a former military base, the remnants of our last hope, our last line of defense. The ground trembles beneath my feet as the sound of alien aircraft drifts down from above, the hum of their engines reminding us of the monsters we are up against. But we are not broken. Not anymore. Before we move forward, I need to tell you everything. Everything that has led to this moment. From the early days of chaos and confusion, when we had no idea what we were up against, to the guerrilla strikes that kept the invaders on their toes, to the day we learned their weaknesses. We've made mistakes, countless mistakes, but we've also learned, adapted, and built upon our knowledge. We've turned their own technology against them. We've discovered their vulnerabilities, and we have grown stronger. But it wasn't easy. We didn't reach this point by fighting alone. Each victory, each battle, has cost us dearly. We've lost so many. Names we'll never forget, faces we'll never see again. The streets are littered with the bodies of our fallen comrades, their blood staining the very soil we're trying to save. I've seen the devastation firsthand, witnessed entire families wiped out in the blink of an eye. I've been to the trenches, listened to the screams of people who, like me, never thought they would see this day. The alien forces are unlike anything we could have ever imagined. They are merciless, efficient, and relentless. Their weapons unstoppable. Their technology far beyond anything we have ever seen. Yet as the days wore on, we realized something. They are not invincible. They are not gods. They are not all-knowing. They are fallible, just as we are. And we will use that to our advantage. The final stand begins today. Our plan is simple, but it has been years in the making. We've been building, gathering, and waiting for the right moment. And now, that moment has arrived. The resistance will launch simultaneous attacks across every major city still standing, and the goal is clear. Disrupt the aliens' control centers, disable their fleets, and destroy their communication networks. We have learned that, without communication, they falter. Without their advanced systems, they're vulnerable. I'm standing alongside the last of our fighters, civilians, soldiers, scientists, engineers, people who should have never been forced into this role. Yet here we are, staring down the alien forces that have come to claim our world. As I speak, we're preparing for our assault. We've gathered every piece of technology we can find, every weapon that's been scavenged, every bit of hope we could muster. We're ready, but I won't lie to you listeners. This could be the end. In the days leading up to this final battle, the Resistance did something extraordinary. We launched a strike at their heart, their central command structure. The goal was to take out the alien leaders, the ones orchestrating the chaos, the ones we believed were pulling the strings. We didn't know what to expect, but we knew one thing. The aliens were not going to let us do this without a fight. And they didn't. The battle was catastrophic. We hit their command center, yes, but they retaliated with everything they had. The skies turned black as their ships descended from the clouds, unleashing hell upon us. The city we had once called home became a war zone. The streets were torn apart by blasts from alien energy weapons, and the air was thick with smoke. I saw people I'd known for years, people I'd worked beside, torn apart before my eyes. But we fought, and we pushed them back. We thought it was over when we took out their command center. But then came the revelation that shattered any hope we had left. The aliens were not fighting alone. They had been in contact with other factions, other worlds. What we had been fighting for so long was merely a small part of a much larger plan, an invasion that spanned the galaxy. Earth wasn't just an outpost, it was a stepping stone, a resource to be stripped clean. The aliens weren't here to colonize, they were here to harvest. We were facing not just one species, but an entire network of intergalactic conquerors. I'm sure you're wondering how we've managed to hold on this long. The truth, it's sheer willpower. It's the hope that flickers even in the darkest moments. The same hope that led people in every corner of the world to rise up against the invaders. I'll tell you this, the aliens may be more advanced than us, but we have something they don't. Something that can't be replicated by technology. We have a will to survive. We have a drive to protect our families, our friends, our homes. And when you push a people to the edge, when you take everything from them, there's only one thing left they can do. Fight back with everything they have. The final stand is not just about winning. It's about survival. It's about showing the invaders that Earth is not theirs to take. We've already lost so much, but we refuse to lose our future. We refuse to lose our world. Right now, as I speak, the battle is intensifying. I can hear the distant rumble of alien ships overhead. The air smells of burning flesh and metal. The ground shakes beneath us, but the resistance is relentless. They are pushing forward, moving closer to our objective. We've been preparing for this moment for years, and the time has come. The aliens think they can crush us, that they can break our spirit, but they have underestimated us. As we fight, I know one thing. This is our world. This is our home, and we will not go down without a fight. We may not have their technology, we may not have their firepower, but we have something far more powerful. Our unity, our strength, our resolve. The final stand is here, and we are not giving up. So if you can hear me, if you're out there still listening, know that we are not done yet. The fight isn't over. We may be battered, broken, and bruised, but we are still standing. And as long as we have breath in our lungs, we will fight for our world, for humanity. And in the end, we will rise victorious, or we will die trying. This is it, the last broadcast. If you're hearing this, then you've made it, or you're still fighting, I don't know which. But I can tell you, we're at the end now. The storm has passed, but the world we knew, it's gone. Whatever happens after today, it won't be the same. It can't be. We've all heard the stories, the legends of what follows a war. The world changes, people change. We've seen it firsthand. The aliens are gone, or at least that's what we hope. But it doesn't matter now. We've paid the price, and the cost was steep. But even in the aftermath, in the silence that has come after the chaos, there is still a glimmer of hope. Hope, but only for those who manage to survive. I remember the moments after the final battle. I'd been with the resistance, coordinating the attack, making sure the plan went off as it should. I saw the explosions light up the sky, heard the alien ships crashing down in flames. It was beautiful in a way, watching their war machines fall, like a dark eclipse that finally gave way to daylight. But even then, the victory came with a bitter taste. The cost was higher than we'd ever anticipated. The survivors were few, too few. The first few days after the battle were a haze. Everyone was in shock, walking around as if the world we'd fought for wasn't even real. I saw faces I'd known for years, some I never thought I'd see again, covered in dust and grime, bloodied but alive. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after a storm has passed, leaving only the debris in its wake. At first, we didn't know what to do with ourselves. The adrenaline of the fight had worn off, and in its place was exhaustion, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I'll tell you this, the world after the war, after the invaders were gone, was unrecognizable. Cities once full of life now lay in ruins, reduced to rubble by the relentless bombardment from above. The air still carried the acrid smell of burning metal and scorched earth. And the ground was stained with the blood of our brothers and sisters, our parents, our children. The battlefields were scattered with the wreckage of human and alien alike. But the aliens weren't the only ones who left a mark on this world. We did too. We're different now. We had to be. We adapted, became something else in order to survive. The survivors, those few who remain, have formed new groups, new families. We've turned our backs on the old world. There is no place for the old ways in the world we live in now. The ones who survived aren't just the strong. They're the clever, the resourceful, the ones who were able to adjust to the harsh new reality. For weeks, the survivors scavenged what was left. We built new systems of communication, crude and ragged, but it worked. We scrounged for food, for water, for supplies. Every day was a fight just to stay alive. We had to learn to defend ourselves, to fight even without the advanced weapons we once had. There were no more safe zones, no more havens. The old governments, the old institutions, they crumbled. The power structures vanished in the wake of the invasion. But in that chaos, something new emerged. There was no longer room for division, no more borders, no more nations. We didn't have the luxury of looking at one another and seeing countries, races, or religions. We saw each other as people, survivors. That's all we could be. The old world had been burned away, and what was left was a new order, built from the ashes of the old. I don't think people will ever fully understand the toll this has taken on us. We've lost so much. Families torn apart, friendships shattered. The cities, once the lifeblood of humanity, are nothing but graves now. The monuments to our past, the technology, the knowledge, the culture, it's all in ruins. And yet we carry on. The ones who remain are the ones who have learned to live in the aftermath. There is no time for grief anymore. We've had to adapt or die. It's a brutal truth, but it's the only truth that matters now. We've started to rebuild, but it's not the same. We're not trying to bring back the old world. We know it's gone. The planet has changed. The atmosphere is still full of radiation from the battle, the fallout from the alien technology, from their weapons. And the climate has become erratic. The invaders' ships disturb the balance, changing the weather patterns. Earth's ecosystems, already fragile from centuries of human abuse, have been thrown into chaos. It's a fight for survival on a scale we've never experienced. But we fight. The survivors, the last of humanity, will rebuild, step by step. We'll reclaim the world in our own image, and we will make sure that the legacy of those who fought, who bled, and who died lives on. The days after the battle felt endless. The silence from the alien ships, the crumbling cities, the constant tension in the air, all of it kept us on edge. But slowly, we began to pick up the pieces. It started with the small things, gathering food, finding clean water, rebuilding shelters, and then we started doing what we'd been trained to do, organize. We set up outposts, re-established communication networks, and began to learn about the alien technologies we had so mercilessly fought against. We took the wreckage of their machines and turned it into our weapons. What we couldn't repair, we scavenged for parts. There was a strange sense of pride in that. The idea that we could use the tools of our enemies to rebuild what they had destroyed. But it wasn't without its cost. The alien technology was not made to be understood by humans. The knowledge we gained from it was both a blessing and a curse. Some of it made us stronger, more efficient. But some of it, well, let's just say that not everything we uncovered was meant to be unearthed. And then there was the fear, the ever-present fear. What if they come back? What if this was only the beginning? We know the alien forces were part of something much larger, an intergalactic empire stretching beyond our comprehension. The question lingers in the back of our minds. Will they return? And if they do, will we be ready? Some days I wake up and think it's all over, that we're just waiting for the next wave of destruction. Other days I think we might have a chance. But the truth is, I don't know. No one does. The world is not what it was, and the future is uncertain. But there's one thing I know for sure. We've survived. We survived the worst thing humanity has ever faced. And no matter what happens next, that is something no one can take away from us. So as I close this broadcast, I want to leave you with this final thought. We are the survivors. We are humanity, and we will rise again. We will rebuild. We will stand tall, and we will never forget those who came before us, who fought for us, and who gave their lives so we could be here today. The alien invasion may be over, but the fight for our future is just beginning. This is the last transmission from a world reborn. If you can hear me, then you are part of this new world, and together we will survive, we will rebuild, we will rise,